Before we begin, I just want to say one thing. One of my friends decided in a day of celebration of her to stop by. I'd like to say thank you to Nora Alandas. Happy birthday. It's her birthday today, so thank you very much for stopping by. Without further ado, back to sadness. We have my presentation here entitled Why Life Has No Meaning and Why That's Okay. We start off in an interesting spot. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this. Who's stressing or was stressed about standardized testing? Who here is a junior or senior? Raise all your hands. Come on. We all know you freaked out about it at one point or another. Stressed about that extra point. Come on. Nobody, you're not kidding anyone. Because I definitely was. If you're anything like me, you've had ACTs, SATs, the college process, AP scores, all on your mind since around freshman year, and maybe even earlier. I'm now going to be a senior. Somehow I survived. And that process is now just about over. However, when I took my ACT exam this past April, I was in the middle of the reading section and I almost completely broke down. And by the end of this presentation, I hope you learn to love and enjoy that stressful college process in the way that now I do. But for now, let's get back to the topic. Before we can talk about the meaning of life, it's important to outline the givens in life. Descartes famously wrote, cogito ergo sum, which roughly translates in Latin to, I think therefore I am, for any of you philosophy or Latin scholars. Even if I doubt the existence of other people, the planet, even my body, I am doubted. Therefore, if I can doubt, I can think, and if I can think, therefore I am. All of you could very well not be real, though. I really can't prove that. Sorry. You're all a figment of my imagination or something. And then next, I will die. That is, of course, if I am. But we've already proven that, therefore, I will eventually cease to be. This one is rather self-explanatory, and we all will die. Nobody, it's an inevitability. Nobody will get away from that. It's one of the few guaranteed equalizers in life, no matter your background. However, I would like to make things a little happier and cheerier, if that's not a word, but whatever, as I'm sure at least a few of you are beginning to have some sort of internal meltdown that you really can't trust anything that you very well, your body isn't real, all that crap. You will, however, though, we have a positive silver lining. You will leave some form of influence or legacy. You will affect people constantly, and you will leave a legacy on this earth. This influence may be left simply on your family, your town, maybe even your state, if you're lucky, your country, if you're truly phenomenal, the world, and if you're an astronaut, solar system and beyond. But let's move on to a bleaker probability. Modern science shows that eventually the sun will explode and destroy everything you spent your life doing, all that legacy, all that influence, and we will have no legacy. And we can move on to this interesting concept of death and why it bothers us so much. And if we really want to dig deeper into philosophy, who's to say we're all here right now? We can go into skepticism, all that jazz. Why not be a pessimist and say, you can't prove anything, but your mind is real, you're all just figments of my imagination. I could go on forever about that. So forget death. How can we even prove that anything around us is? How can we prove anything other than that we are and we will die? But why does death bother us so much? There are a few obvious reasons as to why humans fear death. One of them being the idea of the negative evil. And what the negative evil is that you fear that the ending, the cutting off of earthly things, of humanly things. You're worried about, not getting to hear birds on your morning walk, the cup of fresh coffee on a Sunday morning, all that stuff. There's also the idea of human nature, which forces us, or at least most people, to fear the absolutely unknown. Who here is familiar with the book Heaven is for Real? Anyone? I get some takers? There we go. Basically, for everyone who isn't, what happens is A kid is pronounced dead for 5 minutes. They bring him back to life. He tells his father, who's a pastor, I had this otherworldly experience. I was in heaven. And the pastor ends up writing a book about it. And it grew to be #1 on the New York Times list for 10 straight weeks. Even had a movie made out of it. But why? It's because humans have this natural fear of death and the unknown. And any moment that has a proof of afterlife is cherished by the public. However, speaking of that afterlife, there's no logical proof for heaven. There's no logical proof for an afterlife in general. I wouldn't get my hopes up, personally at least. The idea of afterlife is entirely based on faith. Think about for a second before you were born. Does anybody remember being in heaven? No takers? No. I wasn't either, personally. And why is it that by living life you're rewarded with heaven? If you're just returning to non-existence, wouldn't you just theoretically return to that state before you're born that nobody here can recollect, that nobody remembers being with a big bearded guy in Jesus? And lastly, we fear death because it's an expiry date on when we must stop attempting to achieve meaning and fulfillment in our lives. Once we die, we can no longer make an impact ourselves. We're completely relying on this legacy to do that job for us indirectly. And if we remember correctly, that legacy will be destroyed eventually by the sun. I mean, we kind of have to look at it that way. However, let's look more closely at that meaning of life. When people speak of it, usually adults, teachers, our grandparents, your regular parents, and maybe even your peers, the population usually attempts to convey this idea of legacy, of purpose, that truly, as we saw, will be taken away. We have legacy, purpose, and if you're a nerd like me, the number 42. I don't know if anyone's going to get that literary reference. I'm sorry, I'm a nerd. There we go. Thank you, somebody. However, why accept this meaning of legacy, of purpose? Why not come up with your own meaning of life? That is from what the title of this talk derives. If we attempt to accept the idea that meaning comes from legacy, that meaning comes from a sense of purpose, meeting expectations of others, then we will end up in a vicious cycle of self-loath and disappointment, especially in the 21st century, a century in which the youth and aged alike are believing life to be cynical. To break this cycle, we must decide for ourselves what the meaning of life is and from what it is derived. There is definitely beauty in a word with a different meaning for everyone, such as the word meaning. Additionally, if you want to appreciate every limited moment that you have in life, you must begin to live in the present. Think of this. There's only going to be one July 26th, 2016. Ever. It's never going to happen again. And if you spend July 2016, worrying about what will happen on July 27th or what happened on July 25th, and I'm sure many of you are at this point, being that it's our last week together, that you're regretting and worrying about the future, then how is it that you will be able to be a part of the day that is? You will lose being a part of that day. Therefore, I wish to leave you with 2 messages. Find your own meaning to life. It's okay that there's no general meaning to life. Make that meaning something you love. The saying goes that if you love what you do, you won't work a day in your life. Furthermore, if you love what you do, you will never regret, which keeps your mind on the present. It may be politics, it may be animals, it may be poetry, it can be whatever it is that you truly enjoy. For me, I read every day, every single day. And I find my own meaning in the topics and stories that I read and my own story that I aspire to be a part of every day. And finally, live in the present. I want to go back to that story about the ACT that I started off with. I was in the middle of the reading section, and I, shockingly enough, realized how much I was going to miss the exam. For about my freshman year up until that moment, I was preparing and working to get there. with working, tutors, trying to get knowledge over 3 years, really everything. And I was preparing to work there looking only to the future, hoping to make it to that point, to the moment where I could put down my pencil and say it was over. However, I forgot to enjoy the journey. Something I will never get to do again, something I'll never get back. To live in the present, as many of you may notice, I read the newspaper every day. Very publicly, too. I kind of like attention. It's kind of why I do this. And I started doing it after the ACT because I had this teenage life crisis. And the main reason I do it is not to hear about how Theresa May is running the country now or any of that. It's because at the top, every single day, there's a date. And it reminds me that today will be that one day. It will be the only day that will happen. And today, I read Tuesday, July 26th, 2016. And it was a great day. Thank you.